Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to this week's Friday Reads, where I talk about everything that I read in the last week, what I'm currently in the middle of, and what I think I'm going to be getting to next. And there is a ton to talk about. So actually we're going to do things a little differently because usually I go chronologically, but this time we're going to separate out the DNFs because I had 3 of them in the last week. So we are going to start with It Wasn't Always Like This by Joy Preble. Or maybe Preble. I'm not really sure. But this is a young adult fantasy kind of thing. And we're following our main character who is part of a community who accidentally drank from the Fountain of Youth. And they stop aging, and it pretty much immediately the Church of Light, the bad guys, start hunting them down and manage to kill the entire community other than our main character and her boyfriend. Fast forward to present day, our main character is still on the run from the Church of Light, and they are getting much closer to her, and she doesn't know where her boyfriend is anymore. And the story kind of goes from there. There were a number of things in this book that made me want to DNF it. Like little things where I just I'm not feeling this. But there was a big world building thing that basically made me rage quit this at 12 pages in. And it was essentially that in the prologue chapter, our main character's younger brother drank half a jug of benzene, which is paint thinner, paint stripper, something like that. It's not something you're supposed to be drinking. It's poisonous. And he's described, his reaction is described as he looked a little green for about a minute and then he was fine. Okay, fine. And then move into the next chapter, and somehow our main character has drank enough alcohol to get drunk, and then the next day she doesn't have a hangover. And I was just like, that's not how biology works, and I don't need this anymore. And so I went ahead and DNF'd it. And then we have Seven Devils by Laura Lamb and Elizabeth May. This is an adult science fiction, feminist take. It's a crew of all women doing something for a rebellion. Again, I DNF'd it, so I didn't make it that far in. I DNF'd this one at page 51. In those first 50 pages, there were 2 different perspectives. I know that we get more later, but I only had 2. It was Eris, who actually I really liked. I was really happy to follow that character. And then Chloe, who I did not like, and I think I was supposed to. But basically, my biggest problem with Chloe is that she hates Eris for kind of understandable reasons, but we see the situation that happened, and I think I was supposed to feel more sympathy towards Chloe than I actually did. There was basically no feelings inspired, and so when we got to the point where she's like, this is why I hate Eris, I was just like, I mean, okay, but maybe get over yourself. So it just kind of felt like maybe it was being added in as this dramatic piece, and I was just over it. And also, like I said, I still didn't like Chloe in general, so I was just like, I don't want to read something where there's at least one main character who I actively dislike. And then there are just a lot of other things that I was a little wishy-washy or a little iffy on, and this has gotten some very, very mixed reviews, so it's just I'm not sure that the ending is even going to be worth it. So I just went ahead and DNF'd it. And then the last thing I DNF'd in the last week is Repo Virtual by Corey J. White. So this is a adult cyberpunk sort of standalone book, and we're following our main character of JD, who is a repo man, but in virtual space, which is so cool. And he actually ends up putting together a heist to steal something from a very, very wealthy person, only it turns out to be the first sentient AI. And the story goes from there. And I DNF'd this at page 19. And this was more of a writing issue. I really did not like the writing. The first chapter is we start off in the virtual reality, which I've later found out is we don't actually spend a ton of time in the virtual reality. So I don't know why we started there, but we do. And it's supposed to be that thing where you start in the virtual reality and that's what you think is real. And then you start getting clues that maybe this isn't the real world. It just was done not well. So there were these intrusions and it felt clunky, and it was just I don't understand. And just the writing of the individual sentences was just not very clear. And so by the time I got to page 19, I was just like, nope, I don't care. And so I went ahead and DNF'd it. So on to the things that I did finish. First up is Spelunking Through Hell by Seanan McGuire, the 11th book in the Encrypted series. So the Encrypted series is an adult urban fantasy series that is following a family of cryptozoologists who study and liaison with and sometimes, you know, kill the monsters that the rest of us don't even know exist. This is Alice's book, and Alice has been on a 50-year journey to try to find her husband in whatever dimensional hole he has been put into, and she thinks that she finally has a solid lead on his location. And the story goes from there. And this was honestly a fascinating story. Alice is 100% an unreliable narrator, but the really interesting thing is the first 10 books of this series are actually from the perspective of her grandchildren. So we've seen her, like, you know, mental instability from the perspective of her kids. And she's here being like, everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. And you're just like, okay, like, I don't know that you're a good, you know, person. I don't think you know your own mental health. I just think that you're a person that doesn't know that very well. And so you're just like sitting here going, I'm not actually sure which side to believe. And that was like the first, I don't know, 100 pages or so. And then we get into more action-packed, like really moving. And it was just really nice. And really what this book felt like was the end of a chapter where it feels like the end of a small narrative arc that is pulling you into the next chapter. So I can't wait to see what is going to happen next with this series, because we could go in so many different directions. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this, I think, 4.5 stars, something 4.25, maybe 4.5. It was like definitely kind of an in-between book. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then the next thing that I finished is Rosemary and Roo by Seanan McGuire. This is the first book in the October Day series, which is an adult urban fantasy series about October Day, who is half human, half fae, and she is a knight, and she in the fairy courts, I guess I should say. She's a knight in the fairy courts, and she frequently solves very unusual problems around the courts because she's kind of best suited to solve them. This is a reread of one of my favorite series, so just a heads up. And this is interesting because I actually reread this 2 years ago. And the thing about the reread that I did 2 years ago, was that it had been so long since my previous reread that I didn't remember how like rough the first book was. So my reaction was like, this is terrible. It's so bad. Like, I can't believe I continued on with this series. So that was my reaction 2 years ago. So knowing that was my reaction going into this one, like, it wasn't as bad as I thought. So that was really, really nice. I will say it is still very rough. This was a debut novel. It was a debut urban fantasy novel in 2009. It feels very much like a debut urban fantasy novel from 2009. The writing is kind of rough. There's a lot of info dumpiness, which is actually like really important stuff, but not all of it is like immediately relevant in this first book. It's just, there's a lot going on. This is still probably one of my least favorite books in the series. That's where I landed on this. It wasn't as bad as I thought, but it is in some ways my least favorite, partially because in this book, Toby has basically been magically forced to solve a murder. Basically, if she doesn't solve this murder, she's going to be killed by this curse. And she's not really like a good detective. Like, which it's funny as hell because like she was a private investigator when she was mostly in the human realms. She was a private investigator, and I'm like, how? So she's like kind of, you know, stumbling around trying to find the killer, and like she's really just reacting to a lot of different situations because she just never has a moment to breathe. and I don't like that. I really don't. I hate the antagonist. It's not my favorite book. I still think it's better than what I like. Again, it's better than what I thought 2 years ago. So I ended up bumping up my rating this. I last 2 years ago I gave it 3 stars. This time I'm giving it 3.25, and now I can at least be comfortable knowing that it wasn't as terrible as I remember. And then we have Tofu Quilts by, oh, the author is covered up, Ching Young Russell, which I might be pronouncing wrong. I didn't find the pronunciation. But this is an elementary school book of poetry, actually. And it's a nonfiction. I don't know if it qualifies as nonfiction. I mean, they put it in fiction, but it's essentially Russell is talking about how she she decided to become a writer, how she was led down that path when she was overseas in Hong Kong. That's where I believe where she was born and raised. And I would never have picked this up, except it did actually like fulfill a prompt on an Avengers board, because I am doing the Avengers Readathon. I needed a book set in Hong Kong. I chose this one, and actually I really liked it. I'm not really a poetry person in general, but I think what made it work is that this is for elementary school kids, because like a lot of the problems I have with poetry is like, it's just, I don't understand it as easily, but because this was intended for children, I understood a lot better, and I actually really, really liked it. So yeah, it was quite enjoyable. I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then, okay, I did read another thing for another Avengers prompt, and here's what I will say. If I read something specifically for an Avengers prompt and I don't like it, like I picked it up specifically for that reason, I wouldn't have picked it up otherwise, and I end up not liking it, for the most part, I'm just not going to mention it, because like that seems really rude to be like, hey, I hated this thing I never would have picked up in the first place. That's so rude. But I did want to mention one thing. So I picked up the new Superman by Jean Luen Yang, and look, there's a lot of mixed feelings on this particular volume. I didn't like it for any number of reasons. You can go read reviews if you're curious. People are very divided. But one thing that the reason that I wanted to mention this book here was because most of those reviews did not mention the fact that there are fat-phobic remarks throughout this entire graphic novel. It's our main character of Kong Keenan, yeah. He becomes a new Superman. He's a bully, but also like throughout this entire graphic novel, when he's working with the new Batman, like they eventually become friends, and even still he has given this guy a nickname, and it is Tubby. He is calling his friend Tubby, and I was just like, no. It made me so unhappy every time it was on page. It's not the only instance of fat-phobic remarks. I wanted to mention it because, like I said, most of the reviews were not mentioning that. So, just a heads up. So, that is everything that I read, everything that I DNF'd. So, moving on into what I am actually in the middle of. I have books all around me. It's really interesting. So trying to find the correct one is a little difficult. But I am actually in the middle of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I am finally starting the Wayfarers series, which is an adult science fiction series. I'm not even entirely certain what it's about. It's been called like cozy science fiction, hope punk, that kind of thing. I believe like our main character ends up on this like small ship. So Rosemary ends up on this small ship, and she's really not expecting much, but like it's kind of like them all coming together as a family, which I'm really excited about. I'm only 12 pages in. I'm on page 12. I started this on Wednesday night thinking, oh, I have Thursday. No, did I start it? I started on Tuesday night thinking I have Wednesday and Thursday. I should be able to get a good chunk of it done. And I read nothing. I started on Wednesday and then I proceeded to read nothing. So I'm 12 pages in. I really liked the first 2 chapters that I read, which is really exciting. And that's all I can say about that. Like, I've only read 2 chapters. It seems like it's going to work pretty well for me. And then I did actually make some amount of progress in case studies in retrofitting suburbia, urban design strategies for urgent challenges by June Williamson and Ellen Dunham Jones. So this is a textbook about how to take suburban areas and retrofit them to be more urban. And I made it through the second chapter, which is actually a feat in and of itself, because it was all about how to kind of like, well, what is the second chapter called? It's more about health. So it's called Improve Public Health. And it was basically saying that like urban areas should ensure that it's allowing for physical activity, whether that's more walking, biking, going to the park, being able to play, whatever. It should be incorporated into the design, which is actually something that I very much agree with. But then they basically link like everybody's health and say, we can tell everybody's unhealthy because everybody's fatter, which is not accurate. The link between obesity and health is not something that actually, like, the link between obesity and increased risk of negative health stuff doesn't actually kick in until a much, much higher BMI than like what most of us think. It's like something like 35. So like to bring people's weight into it was really, really frustrating. And so that was a really rough chapter to get through. Also, really interestingly, one of the things that I keep seeing is the way that they're talking about it is kind of like, let's force more physical activity. Like people, if you do design it more, like people will walk more. And it sounds almost like they're trying to force it. And I don't know that they intend that, but then also they don't talk about having talked to any kind of disability experts, especially for those with mobility issues, especially those who have mobility issues where they're still moving under their own power, but it's with the help of an aid like a cane or a walker. Because like I don't actually have any problem with giving people the opportunity to have more physical activity, but also like ensuring that people don't have to walk further than like they're able would be really nice. And I don't know, they might actually be talking to experts, like disability experts, but they're not mentioning it, and just kind of how they're talking about it is a little strange. So yeah, that second chapter was a little weird, I will say, but I'm out of it. We're now looking at like how that urbanization will help an aging population, and I think that chapter is going to go much, much better. So that's everything that I am in the middle of, actually. So moving into what I think I'm going to get to next week, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet is going to get put aside. I am really actually sad about this, but the thing is, I'm only 12 pages in, and I've got this huge TBR for April, so I'm a little concerned that I'm not going to be able to finish my TBR as is without adding on almost 450 pages of another book that's not even on the list. So this is going to get put aside for now. When I feel more comfortable with how much I've read from my April TBR, I'll probably pick this back up because it was really good. So I'm hopeful that it won't be too long before I am able to pick it back up. But yeah, this is getting put aside. And to be perfectly honest, this is mostly getting put aside as well, retrofitting suburbia. I mean, I'm probably going to try to continue at least at the pace that I was going, but I don't think I can go any faster, which is bad because I actually need to return that to the library soon. So we'll see how that goes. The most likely things to come up, starting with books that I'm actually supposed to read for the readathon, the Magical Readathon. War Prize by Elizabeth Vaughn. This is a romance. This is also likely to come up pretty soon, simply because this is a book that there's a possibility that I'm going to DNF it. As I've been going back through and reading my romance, especially my fantasy romance, it's not going well. on reread, I decide that I don't actually like it. So this is a little concerning. I'm going to try to read it sooner in the month so that I know if I need to pick up another book for that prompt, which I don't actually remember which prompt it is. I don't know. I'll put it down below once I look it up. Also, possibly, I'm going to pick up A Local Habitation by Shauna McGuire, the second book in the October Day series. I want to continue on with this reread. It's been really enjoyable. And so that's also likely to come up next week. And potentially also Sweep of the Blade by Alona Andrews, the fourth book in the Innkeeper Chronicles series. This is actually the only book that is not a prompt, like for a prompt for the Magical Readathon or part of my DNF project. But I need to read this before I can get to the novella that comes afterwards, which is for a prompt. So this is also likely going to come up. So these three books I'm going to try to get through all three of them in the next week. For my DNF project, I have three books currently currently checked out from the library. The first is Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon-Ha Lee. I don't know too much about it. The second one is The Dark Shores by Danielle L. Jensen, which is like piratey vibes, I would guess. And the third one is, I think, called The Mask of Shadows by Lindsay Miller. So those are the three books for my DNF project. These are ones where I'm not sure that I'm going to like them, and so I'm going to try them. But that's it. That's everything that I read, DNF'd. That's everything I'm in the middle of. That's everything I think I might get to within the next week. It was so much, but now we are done. So if you have any thoughts or feelings about anything, any of the books that I talked about in this Friday Reads, please leave me a comment down below. But that is all I have for this video. So if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.